Lake Michigan stretched endlessly under the gray morning sky, waves rocking the sleek yacht that floated far from shore. The air smelled of cold water and expensive fuel. Inside the cabin, the tension was thick enough to suffocate anyone with common sense. Jack Abbott sat on the edge of the bed, his head pounding like a drum. The lingering effects of whatever Patty Williams had slipped into his drink still clawed at his thoughts. His memories were fragmented, moments blurred together. The room spun slightly every time he moved. Patty stood nearby, wrapped lazily in a sheet like she was the star of some twisted romantic comedy only she understood. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Well," Patty said cheerfully, brushing her hair back, "that was certainly memorable." Jack stared at her in disbelief. What happened?" Patty tilted her head. "Oh, Jack, don't pretend you don't remember. You wanted me." The words hit him like ice water. Jack rubbed his temples, struggling to focus. "No, that's not possible." Patty smirked. "You were lonely," she continued softly. "Stranded out here with me, a handsome man like you starved for affection." Jack suddenly stood, anger replacing confusion. "This is insane. I love Diane." Patty's smile widened, the kind of smile that belonged in horror movies rather than on yachts. "You love Diane," she corrected. Before Jack could respond, the door to the cabin burst open. Diane Jenkins Abbott stepped inside. Behind her stood Billy Abbott and Kyle Abbott. For a moment, the world stopped moving. Diane froze. Her eyes fell on the bed, then on Jack, then on Patty, and the room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Billy blinked slowly, clearly trying to process what he was seeing. "Well," Billy muttered under his breath, "that's not exactly the rescue scene I imagined." Kyle looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach. "Dad," he said quietly. Jack stepped forward desperately. "Diane, wait, this isn't what it looks like." Patty clapped her hands with childish delight. "Oh good," she said brightly, "now it's a party." Diane's face had gone pale, her eyes burning with betrayal. "You expect me to believe there's an explanation for this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jack shook his head urgently. "Yes, something happened. Patty drugged me. I barely remember anything." Patty rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, don't ruin the romance." Diane looked like she wanted to scream. "You sick woman," Diane snapped. Patty only laughed. "You should thank me. Jack clearly needed a real woman for a change." The words hung in the air like poison. Kyle stepped forward, furious. "That's enough." Billy held up a hand, trying to keep the situation from turning into a full-scale disaster. But Diane wasn't listening. She stared at Jack with tears forming in her eyes. "I trusted you," she whispered. Jack's voice cracked. "Diane, please." The sound of the slap echoed across the cabin. Jack staggered slightly as Diane's hand struck his face. The room fell silent. Even Patty seemed impressed. Diane stepped back, breathing hard. "I don't want to hear a single word from you," she said. Patty shrugged casually and began gathering her clothes. "Well, this was fun," she said, "but clearly I'm no longer welcome." Diane pointed toward the door. "Get out." Patty laughed softly as she dressed. "Oh, Diane, you should really thank Victor for arranging this little adventure." Jack's eyes widened. "Victor." Patty winked. Then she walked past Billy and Kyle like nothing had happened. Moments later, the yacht door slammed behind her. Jack turned back to Diane desperately. "You have to listen to me." But Diane was already backing away. Billy cleared his throat awkwardly. "Okay, I'm going to say this as calmly as possible," he said. "What the hell just happened?" Kyle's anger was far less controlled. "Dad, how could you do this to Mom?" Jack looked devastated. "I didn't." Diane shook her head bitterly. "That's exactly what every cheating husband says." Jack stepped closer. "Diane, Victor set this up." Diane laughed bitterly. "Of course, now it's Victor's fault." Jack's voice rose. "Because it is." But Diane turned away. Billy quietly pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Trasa," he said. Kyle crossed his arms, staring at his father with disappointment. The Abbott family rescue mission had turned into something none of them expected. Billy spoke into the phone. "Hey, Trasa, good news, Jack's safe." Across the yacht cabin, Diane stood motionless, staring out at the lake. But her silence spoke louder than any words. Meanwhile, at the Newman ranch, the mood was far from peaceful. Nikki Newman stormed through the living room like a thundercloud. Victor Newman sat calmly in his chair, though his expression showed irritation. "You're quiet," Nikki said sharply. Victor raised an eyebrow. "I'm thinking." Nikki folded her arms. "Thinking about how your brilliant plan just failed." Victor's jaw tightened. The plan had been simple. Kidnap Jack. Humiliate him. Destroy the Abbott family's reputation. But now the Abbotts had found him. And worse, Nikki had just learned the truth. "You went too far this time, Victor," she said. Victor's voice turned cold. "I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" Nikki scoffed. "You stranded a man on a yacht with a psychopath." Victor didn't answer. At that moment, Victoria entered the rooms. "What's going on?" she asked. Nikki turned to her. "Your father kidnapped Jack Abbott." Victoria blinked. For a moment, she looked stunned. Then her expression hardened. "Honestly," she said slowly, "I'm not surprised." Nick walked in seconds later, overhearing the last sentence. "What are we talking about?" Victoria sighed. "Dad arranged for Jack to be kidnapped." Nick stared at Victor in disbelief. "You did what?" Victor remained calm. "It was a strategic move." Nick shook his head. "You're starting a war with the Abbotts." Adam entered the room next. He glanced between everyone. "This looks cheerful." Nick sighed. "Dad just kidnapped Jack Abbott." Adam paused. "Okay, even for this family, that's a new level." Victor stood slowly. "Enough." Nick crossed his arms. "You think this won't blow back on us?" Victor's eyes hardened. "I will handle the consequences." Victoria stepped forward. "Well, while everyone argues, I'm going to Milan." Nick frowned. "What?" Victoria continued calmly. "I'm bringing Summer back to our side." Nick looked frustrated. "This family is falling apart and you're recruiting people." Victoria smirked slightly. "Someone has to think strategically." Across town at Crimson Light's coffee house, Sharon Newman sat with Chelsea Lawson. Chelsea looked worried. "So Adam's really going to Vegas?" Sharon nodded. "Nick will be with him." Chelsea sighed. "I just hate the idea of Adam going back to that life." Sharon smiled reassuringly. "He's not the same man he used to be." Chelsea looked uncertain. "I hope you're right." Later that evening at the airport, Adam stood with Chelsea. The departure board glowed overhead. "Vegas." Chelsea hugged him tightly. "Be careful." Adam smiled gently. "I will." She stepped back. "I just don't want you becoming Spider again." Adam shook his head. "That man is gone." Across the city, Nikki returned to the Newman ranch. Victor sat alone. She crossed the room slowly. "Well," Nikki said, "the Abbotts saved Jack." Victor's face darkened. One of his men had just confirmed it. Nikki continued coldly. "Your plan failed." Victor looked up slowly. "You seem pleased." "I'm relieved," Nikki replied. Victor stood. "You're becoming very tiresome." Nikki's eyes flashed. "I'm trying to stop you from destroying everything." Victor's patience finally snapped. "If you dislike my decision so much." He pointed toward the door. "Then leave." Nikki stared at him in shock. Victor's voice was ice. "Get out of my house." Nikki Newman stood frozen in the middle of the Newman Ranch living room. Victor's words echoed through the house like a gunshot. "Get out of my house." For a moment, Nikki couldn't believe what she had heard. After decades of marriage, betrayal, forgiveness, and rebuilding their lives again and again, Victor had just thrown her out like a stranger. Her eyes burned with anger. "You're serious," Nikki said quietly. Victor didn't soften. "You have made your position very clear." Nikki shook her head slowly, disbelief turning into fury. "You kidnapped a man, you manipulated a mentally unstable woman, and somehow I'm the problem." Victor crossed his arms. "I did what was necessary to protect my family." Nikki laughed bitterly. "No, Victor, you did what you always do. You tried to destroy the Abbotts because you couldn't control them." Victor's eyes hardened. "You are free to leave if you disagree." The coldness in his voice was unmistakable. Nikki stared at him for several seconds. Then she picked up her purse. "Fine," she said. Her voice was trembling now. "But remember this moment when everything you built starts collapsing." Without another word, Nikki walked toward the door. Victor didn't stop her. He didn't move. He simply stood there as the door slammed shut behind her. For the first time that evening, the great Victor Newman looked uneasy. Across town, the Abbott mansion felt like a battlefield after a bomb had exploded. Diane Jenkins Abbott paced the living room while Jack stood near the fireplace, desperately trying to calm the situation. Billy leaned against the wall, watching the chaos unfold like a spectator at a tennis match. Kyle stood near the staircase, still furious. "You expect us to believe you were drugged," Kyle said. Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Oh, yes." Diane turned sharply. "Convenient." Jack's voice rose slightly. "It's the truth." Diane's laugh was cold and humorless. The truth is I walked into a yacht cabin and found my husband in bed with Patty Williams." Jack stepped forward. "Victor set the entire thing up." Billy sighed. "Honestly, that part I believe." Diane shot Billy a look. "You're defending him." Billy shrugged. "I'm saying Victor Newman kidnapping someone sounds very on brand." Kyle still looked unconvinced. "But Dad," he said quietly, "how did it even happen?" Jack sat down heavily. "I remember Patty offering me a drink." His voice became tense. "After that, everything is blurry." Billy nodded slowly. "That actually makes sense. Patty has pulled that stunt before." Diane crossed her arms. "You're all very quick to excuse him." Jack looked at her desperately. "Diane, please, you know me." For a moment, her expression softened. But then the image of the yacht flashed through her mind again. Patty laughing. Jack in bed. The humiliation. Her face hardened again. "I thought I did," she said quietly. Jack looked crushed. "Are you really going to let Victor win like this?" That question hung heavily in the room. Diane didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Jack asked. "To pack." The word landed like a brick. Jack stood up quickly. "You're leaving." Diane stopped on the staircase. "Oh, yes." Kyle looked shocked. "Mom." But Diane raised a hand. "I can't stay here tonight." Then she walked upstairs. Jack collapsed back into his chair. Billy sighed. "Well, that went about as badly as possible." Kyle glared at him. "This isn't funny." Billy nodded. "No, it's definitely not." Across the city, Nikki drove through the dark streets of Genoa City. Her mind was racing. Victor had crossed a line this time. Even for him. The thought of Patty being involved made her stomach turn. Nikki pulled into the parking lot of the Grand Phoenix Hotel and shut off the engine. For a moment, she sat there in silence. Her entire life with Victor felt like it was unraveling. Meanwhile, back at the Newman ranch, Victor stood alone in the living room. Adam entered quietly. He had clearly heard the shouting earlier. "So," Adam said cautiously, "I'm guessing Mom isn't staying for dinner." Victor didn't respond. Adam studied him for a moment. "You kicked her out." Victor looked irritated. "She left." Adam shook his head slowly. "You know this will explode, right?" Victor's voice was cold. "I will deal with it." Adam sighed. "You always say that." Nick walked into the room seconds later. He looked exhausted. "Mom just texted me," Nick said. Victor didn't react. Nick looked at him seriously. "You threw her out." Victor's patience was running thin. "This discussion is over." Nick shook his head. "No, Dad, this family is falling apart." Victor stepped closer. "I am doing what must be done." Nick looked frustrated. "By kidnapping Jack Abbott." Victor's silence answered the question. Adam rubbed his temples. "You know the Abbotts will come after you now." Victor's voice remained calm. "Let them try." The tension in the room was suffocating. Across town at the airport, Adam prepared to board his flight to Las Vegas. Chelsea stood beside him, clearly nervous. "I still hate this idea," she admitted. Adam smiled gently. "I'll be fine." Chelsea shook her head. You're going back to the place where you became Spider. Adam's expression turned serious. That life is behind me. Chelsea studied his face. I want to believe that. Adam squeezed her hand. You should. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminals. Adam picked up his bag. Chelsea hugged him tightly. Come back safe. Adam nodded. Then he walked toward the gates. The past was waiting for him in Vegas. And it wasn't known for being forgiving. Back at the Abbott mansion, Diane finished packing her suitcase. Jack stood in the doorway watching her. You're really leaving, he said quietly. Diane didn't look at him. I need space. Jack stepped forward. You're letting Victor destroy our marriage. Diane zipped the suitcase. No, Jack, you did that. Jack's voice broke. I love you. Diane finally looked at him. Tears filled her eyes. That's what makes this hurt so much. She lifted the suitcase. Jack tried one last time. Diane plays. But she walked past him. Minutes later, the front door closed behind her. Jack stood alone in the silent house. Downstairs, Billy and Kyle exchanged uneasy looks. Kyle spoke quietly. Is this really happening? Billy sighed. Welcome to Genoa City. At that exact moment, far away on Lake Michigan, Patty Williams stood on the dock watching the water. Her smile was triumphant. Everything had worked perfectly. Jack and Diane were torn apart. Victor's plan had detonated the Abbott family. And the real chaos was only beginning. Patty laughed softly to herself. Oh, Jack, she whispered. You should have stayed loyal to me. The night wind carried her laughter across the lake. And somewhere in Genoa City, several powerful families were about to discover that this scandal was only the first domino to fall.